would like to introduce you to my guest of honor this afternoon, Caimh McDonnell, everybody.
Hello.
Author of the Dublin Trilogy, the increasingly misnamed Dublin Trilogy, and my very favourite series of books, The Stranger Times. Caimh, welcome.
Hello, Jodi. It's lovely to do this. Luckily, we've got lots of questions people sent in, so that's good.
Yes. Do you want to make a start? You go first, then.
Right. I'll say I've got from random people, lovely, I mean, not random, very nice people who sent in. Francis Bassam, fabulous name. Your books seem to have quite real kick-ass women in them. Are they based on friends/family or conjured up from memories of past personal encounters?
Well, my first instinct was to say no. I don't know any kick-ass women. And then I suddenly thought all the women I know are kick-ass. My mother, for instance, is a 95-year-old terrorist with a walker. So
amazing.
For God's sake, don't tell her that or I'm dead. But yes, I think most women in their own ways are kick-ass. Some are more in your face than others. Some are standing behind you sometimes, which is always worrying. But yes, they're not based on anybody specific, put it that way.
Yes, it's interesting that because I get that a few times, which is kind of people's mean it as a compliment when they go, where you're good at writing women. And I'm like, yeah, but that's literally over half the planet. If you're not good at writing women, you're not good at writing. Have you ever seen the spoofs of male authors writing female characters? They are hilarious. Yeah, I mean, there is some bizarre things. Although I haven't said that. My wife has said one of the earliest pieces of advice, well, one of the advice from her mother is always, if you want to keep hold of something, put it in your bra. Which is why she stores things there every so now and then. Which is always
I have a sister-in-law who keeps things in her bra, and then every now and then she hands me bra money. How did we get onto this?
I don't know. I'm genuinely, this is the first question as well. Another question from Richard Andrew Nolman, which is a very good one. How long does it take you to write a book, Jodi?
To write, usually about 6 months. I get the story down in 3 to 4 months. I bang that down to make sure that it works. And then I go through and tidy it up, and that takes 2 or 3 months as well, because often I put the same scene several times in a book because I don't know where it's going to have the most impact. So there's a tremendous amount of tidying up to do. By that time, I'm usually on about 150,000 words, which is far too long. So there's text flying in all directions as I weed all that out. And then I just go through and polish and refine. And then I do the spell check and the punctuation, because apparently my approach to commas is a little bit scattergun. Tidy it all up and whiz it off to Headline, who then do their magic things with it for another 6 months about. So usually from start to finish, putting pen to paper, writing the first sentence, publishing, it's about a year. How about you?
Yeah, it sort of varies because obviously the Dublin books we do ourselves, which is my wife kind of works full time. She runs the company and stuff, and she's kind of like the sort of overall editor and stuff. So basically everything goes through her and then it goes to the editors. So it's quite handy that, because I have no idea where commas go either. I don't trust people that do know, if I'm honest. I mean, my editor seems lovely, but if it turned out she buried somebody under the garage, I wouldn't be surprised. It's that kind of mind.
We did commas at school, but I didn't listen because I couldn't imagine circumstances under which it would ever become important. So I just stared out of the window.
Yeah, I've absolutely never had any clue. My handwriting is so appallingly bad that I never worried about punctuation when I was in school, because no one could read what I was writing anyway. Like, I was literally told I was going to fail English because nobody could read anything I wrote. And then in my 20s, we sort of started using computers, and it turned out that I could actually form sentences when the pressure of my handwriting was taken off me. It's weird because when you say how long it takes you to write a book, it's not that easy, because depends where you start counting from. I've got 3 books in my head. The next Bunny book I'm starting next month, and then the next Stranger Times book. And because I'm a terrible sleeper. So what often happens is I will be lying in bed and my brain will go through the next book, then the one after that, and then cycle back.
I thought it was just me, but it's obviously...
It's the kind of weird brain that just does that, that's try to obsess about stories.
Yes. Do you find I can write a whole book in my head overnight, and then the next morning, most of it's gone. It's disappeared. And I know that it was fabulous, but I just can't remember anything about it.
The difficult thing is, if you're bad at sleeping, people say, well, you're not just like get up and then write it down and stuff. But then I'm awake. I'm sort of halfway asleep and awake.
I actually have a notebook in every room, including the bathroom, which is where many of my best thoughts come to me for one reason or another. I've got lots of crinkled notebooks in the bathroom, actually, because they don't respond well.
To be fair, my handwriting's so terrible that if I had notebooks everywhere, I wouldn't be able to read them. My brain sort of tells me what I'm writing that day. I almost feel guilty that it's done the work while I was asleep. This was a very good question Tracy McFadden asked, which I really want to know about, was what kind of research do you do for your books? Your books boggle my mind when the amount of detail and the historical accuracy and stuff like that I find incredible. You must spend ages on that, do you?
Not ages, but a long time. And heartbreakingly, I don't use most of it. It's just there in my brain, providing a background. Because I'm writing a story, not a textbook or anything. True. But what I tend to do is, if I know the subject, that bit of history, I go straight in. If it's something I'm not too familiar with, I Google it. And then I start reading articles, and then I refine it down and narrow it down and start becoming familiar. And I read around the subject and I think, yes, I could insert my characters there, and then they could do this, and this could go wrong, and that could go wrong, and he could die, and she could die. And I work it all out. And I have maps up on the wall around. So there is a lot of people have been to the places I write about, and I haven't. And there's nothing worse than saying we landed on the north side of the hill and looked out across the plain, and 30 people will write to me and say, no, you mean the south side. If the north side looks out over the lake. So there are maps and all sorts of things. I'm usually up to my knees in bits of paper on the floor. I don't use most of it, but it's there. And I hang on to it until the book goes out, and for about a month afterwards, in case anybody writes to me and says this is wrong, that's wrong, the other's wrong, because people do that.
Every author gets that to a certain extent, but you must get it way more than anyone else does.
When I was living out in Turkey, I wrote about Herodotus and I described a eucalyptus tree simply because I was in Turkey and I was looking out of my window and I could see a eucalyptus tree. Never thought, because I'm an idiot. A lovely lady from Australia wrote to me and said the eucalyptus didn't leave Australia until about the 17th century. And I had to apologize to all of Australia, who were very nice about it, I have to say.
My first book was set in Dublin, where, I was technically born in Limerick, but I was in Dublin since about the age of 6 weeks, I believe. But I managed to, this is how bad I am compared to you. Vauxhall cars are called Opel in, I think, actually the rest of Europe, including Ireland.
Yeah.
So I had somebody driving around in a Vauxhall Astra. Here's the funny thing. I owned an Opel Astra and I brought it to the UK with me. And yet, bizarrely, I still managed to forget that it was badged as Opel. And then the other thing, even worse, there are two canals that run through Dublin, the Grand and the Royal. And I thought I'd grown up beside the Grand Canal, and it turns out I'd grown up beside the Royal. Turns out that was the Royal Canal when I used it in the book.
You hadn't simply transposed the names. You genuinely thought you were living next to the wrong canal.
Yeah, I always thought that was called the Royal Canal. It turned out the Grand Canal. It turned out it was the Royal Canal because I described it. Somebody got very upset with me about it. My ultimate cop-out is it's like the Marvel movies where it's the multiverse. So if anyone has a complaint, to go, oh yeah, no, this is like the one over from the world, So there's some things different, like they name the canals differently, and especially Manchester again now with the Stranger Times books, because I do use a lot of Manchester's kind of much weirdly Manchester's in the books almost more than Dublin's in the Dublin books, if you see what I mean. And I have to make up certain parts of it because while the offices of the Stranger Times are inspired by a certain building, I've not used that exact building, and I didn't want people turning up at that exact building and sort of going, this is where all the things are. So I made up Mealy Street, which is where the office is. And it's actually named after my friend Phil Mealy, the writer, who's the most Mancunian bloke I know. So I named the street after him. But then you have people going, well, that's not really there. And you go, nope, made it up. And now you just go, yeah, I made it up. That's completely made up.
Well, jumping ahead, because there's a question about Rushford and Rushfordshire at the end. That is why I made up Rushford. So that, well, firstly, for the power that it gave me in that I could create the geography, the history, everything about it. But there would be nobody saying, no, the post office is on such and such a street, not such and such a street. So that's one of the reasons I set most of my books in Rushfordshire.
Oh, you just reminded me of something brilliant with that. There's a comedian friend of mine, Rod Gilbert, who's a superb comedian. I'm sure a lot of people know him. He's a Welsh comedian, absolutely brilliant. But when he started off, he kind of was much more surreal than he became later on in his career. And he had like the town he came from, and he had all this stuff about the town. He literally wrote a whole hour, like an Edinburgh show based in this town. But the town didn't exist. It was completely made up. And then he had some guy who kept sending him letters complaining that he got it wrong. And like, that's not where that is. And he's like, oh, he literally was like, I've made it up. I know there are certain, particularly Americans, frankly, who get very upset if guns are wrong in books. Like this hasn't got this hasn't got a safety. And it's the classic one where you get people kicking off about it. And I'm like always, oh, okay. I don't think I've ever really gotten that, but I know it's something crime writers get an awful lot. Is people getting obsessed about the guns are wrong in the book. To be honest, now I'm sort of like, if you're the kind of person who gets upset about what the gun in the book looks like, I'm not sure I'm the author for you. Just you know, that way we're like, nowadays I kind of go, read other books. It's fine. There's plenty of other authors. I'm sure they'll appreciate you.
I'm very fortunate. I have an offspring with an extremely interesting background. So if I want information on guns, weapons, gun running, all sorts of things, he's very useful. I did once ring him up and say, what do you know about sex clubs? And gratifyingly, from the author point of view, he knew a lot. From the mother point of view, slightly worrying. But I remember I did say to him once, oh, they don't teach anything at school these days. Nobody ever taught me about snipers when I was at school. And he said, one of my bosses is a sniper. I'll put you in touch. So he's enormously useful from a research point of view, because I wouldn't have a clue about guns.
Well, now I'll be honest. I think I speak for everyone watching this, Jodi, where we're dying to find out is your son James Bond. You can't leave that hanging out there. Wow. That's very impressive. Oh God, I thought you were going to say when you asked about the sex club, I had that with my mother and father years ago. I can't remember what the exact word was, but something was on the television. And I came in, I'd been out in a work stew and I had a few drinks. I came in because I was still living at home at the time. And they went, I can't remember what they asked them. What's that? And I went, what? What's that? And the word was like, I went, I'm gonna go upstairs now and we're not gonna discuss this anymore. And then I was walking up the stairs. And my mother, God love her, has the ability to whisper louder than the human voice normally speaks. So I was going upstairs, all of a sudden, remarkably sober after this horrific thing. And I could hear my mother in the front room going, I think you embarrassed him. I think it's something sexual. Yeah, years of therapy.
My mother, bless her, wandered around my grandmother's funeral with a plate of ham rolls, telling everybody she was shagged out because she'd heard my brother say it without the slightest clue what it meant. So she had to be taken aside and talked to.
To be fair, I think I could beat that. Not that it's a competition. My dad's retirement speech from work. My mother, who does not like public speaking, was asked to say a few words, and she just said, if I remember exactly, she said, "The family's very proud of Michael. He used to be an accountant and had a great career working in the oldest profession." And, and the whole room laughed. And my mum was like, "I must have made a joke." Oh, great! She still doesn't know why people were laughing.
No, that's the thing, isn't it? You have to either keep a straight face or take them aside and tell them where they've gone wrong.
No, I don't. You don't, especially with my mother, because I had the weird thing. You know, the author's note from one of my books went viral, genuinely, completely by accident. I wrote a book that took an Irish character, Bunny, and took him to America. I know you get told that, oh, you'll get bad reviews in America if it's written in British English because they didn't get spelt wrong or something like that, which I think is very overrated. To explain why a book set in America was written in our English, I did a little author's note, and the whole joke of it was, well, I'm scared of you. I'm much more scared of my mother, and I'm going to spell things in the way she, you know. And that sort of weirdly, 2 years after the fact, took a minute to write. It's gone all over the internet. My wife tried to figure out a while ago, and she reckons it's been seen millions of times now. But I told my mother that this had gone viral, and she was like, "Oh God, no!" And she's like, "No idea what viral meant." She's like, "Is this that Alexa thing you got me?" It's like, "No, that's incidentally went straight into a draw."
Is that the one with the Zs?
Yes, that's the one with the
like
Zs,
the little family of ducks.
Yes, and oh my God. I mean, most people got it, but some of the responses are incredible. Um,
Actually, just to be serious for a moment, my American publishers were very happy to leave the British spelling. They thought it
oh,
added to the Britishness of the books. As far as I know, haven't received any complaints at all about all the extra U's in words
yeah,
and
I think.
S instead of Z.
Well, what's even bizarre than that is because I'm like the Stranger Times books are published by Transworld, which is part of Penguin, and I don't know if it's all the Penguin or just Transworld, but they have a thing where they have a house style, so they spell recognize with a Z. Like just all of their books have that. That's just the standard of all of their books, which I've never really understood. And I asked about it, and it's the classic publishing conversation. You ask why something is done, and amazingly, the answer is so many times that's just what we do. Like nobody understands why they do things. We should crack on. We've got to, I think, possibly 3 questions. Liz Newman asks, "Oh, this is a good one. If you go back in time only once, which time or place would you go to, and why? And who would you like to meet?" Ooh,
I would go back to Troy. I've always said this. I would want to see what happened and the people I would like to meet there. I don't think there was a Helen of Troy. I don't think women were that important, and certainly not important enough to go to war for 10 years and leave everything behind. They wouldn't have done that. So I'd like to go to Troy, but I would like to see Hector to see if he was as noble as Homer made him out to be. And I'd also like to see Achilles because he's such a petulant man child, having all these hissy fits over everything. So, yeah, that's what I would like to do.
that would be fascinating because Barry Gale said because Brad Pitt was perfectly cast in the film because that's how he's kind of always been represented. But in reality, Achilles is like 5'4" little dude with a pot belly who's just very good at stabbing people with a sword before they get to him. But yeah, oh, that'd be fascinating. Yeah, God, I think Troy. I'd quite like to go with you to Troy. That'd be pretty cool. Also, I mean, do you think the horse really happened?
No, I don't think so. They'd been there for 10 years. And I suspect there wasn't any wood left around for a radius of about 50 miles. If you think of the practicalities of it,
Yeah.
and of course, any wood that they did have would have gone towards repairing their ships and keeping them seaworthy. They didn't burn it. I've just been into that actually for a short story. They burnt horse dung, and one of Markham's top tips will be that horse dung burns hotter and brighter than firewood. So that's just something he'll toss into the conversation in that very irritating way that he has.
Fabulous. That's a good
Yeah.
tip for life.
So that's you and me down for Troy then. I'll put our names down.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds good. Um,
Okay.
and Liz also asked, are there any plans to write any books in the Frogmorton Farm series?
Liz, bless you for asking. I have a short story out on the 24th of this month, Storm Christopher. And it's a Frogmorton Farm short story. The kids have gone off on a school trip for the weekend, and Jenny and Russell in particular, have plans for the weekend, their first child-free weekend for a very, very long time. And sadly, it doesn't happen because Francesca, the lovely Francesca, managed to get herself into a bit of a pickle. And then they're all in a bit of a pickle as they attempt to extricate Franny from her pickle. And the police turn up. So it's a traditional Frogmorton Farm story.
Excellent. Fabulous. And she's got even a third. I mean, she went crazy for the questions, but she went, what comes first, the history or the story?
It can be either, actually, if it's something I know something about. The early books were about my favorite parts of history. As the books went on, the story became more important. So the history, not pushed to one side, but the story dictated the jumps rather than the other way around, if that makes sense.
Yes. Have you ever used up a part of history later on and you've gone, oh, I wish I hadn't done that bit of history yet because I've got an idea I want to go back? Or would you happily go back to the same point in history and try and reuse it in a different way?
Yeah, I have done that actually. I sent them off on a dodo hunt in 1666, and only afterwards thought, you idiot, that's the Great Fire of London, which is a much more dramatic storyline. So I had a bit of fast talking to do there. But yes, because I don't plan ahead. So consequently, the early books are full of things that I wish I'd left for later on. Do you plan ahead at all?
I think I do to a certain extent. Like weirdly with the Stranger Times, I kind of know what the next Stranger Times book's going to be, but I also know, like, actually before I wrote the last book, I had a very detailed plan, more detailed plan than I've ever had for a book before, for a future Stranger Times book. I don't know if you do this, but the page sort of explanation what the next book is going to be to your editor, and they come back with any notes. And I sent that to my editor for the book 4. The next day I sent an email, ignore that, I'm not doing that now. Because it doesn't feel like it's in the right place. So I've sort of always had it sitting there waiting to do. But the Dublin Trilogy books, they're kind of more standalone stories, but I have several ideas for them. Whereas McGarry Stateside is 4 of those now, and they're kind of building to, I'm not sure if it'll be 5, 6 books, how many. I'm not sure when it's going to reach the climax. But yeah, I kind of plan ahead. And the Stranger Times plan ahead. It's something I do now. It's obviously not something I've always done. And how you know that is I have a book series called the Dublin Trilogy, which has 7 books and counting in it, which is a pretty obvious indication that I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah, I didn't plan ahead at all. I only ever meant to write one book. I was quite surprised when that did well. And I thought, oh, well, I'll do another one. And then I thought, well, I'll do a trilogy because trilogies are fashionable. And then I thought, well, I can't leave it there. I'll have to do another one. And then it just escalated. 14 books now. And as I say, I didn't plan ahead at all. And there are things I did in the earlier books that I wish I hadn't because I could have done better later on. But hey ho.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's all good learning experience. Mary at Armstrong says, any plans to come to the US on a book tour?
Not at the moment, no. In fact, you've reminded me I've got to nip along to the post office and renew my passport.
Weirdly, so do I.
Fun experience because for some reason I don't take a very good photograph. I never seem to get my eyes in the right place when submitting my photograph. I mean, I don't mean they're down
where
here.
do they end up? I was going to say. I was like,
well,
sorry about this.
They have a very strict format, and your eyes are there and your nose is there and your mouth is there. And my face doesn't seem to measure up for some reason.
Oh, dear. I'm actually heading to the US to do research for my next book, but I'm not planning to do anything when I'm there. John Clayton asks, any chance of a crossover between your books and my books? I think that, yeah, if someone says, would Bunny go into the future and get in trouble with Max? It's like, people love those ideas, but I think as soon as you write one, it would basically destroy the structure of everybody's story, wouldn't it?
Yes, probably. I mean, we only met each other about 25 minutes ago, didn't we?
Very true.
So, and neither of us have stopped talking since. So, no, we don't have any plans at the moment.
But you never know. I mean, the one because I get asked that about with my 2 worlds of the Stranger Times and the Dublin books crossover, and I've always sort of gone, well, no, you can't really. And I think now what I have thought of is I could always write a Bunny McGarry short story where he meets a werewolf or something, as long as I can just Bobby Ewing the thing at the end and he wakes up in the shower and it was all a dream. But I might have to write a series of stories where everyone ends with him waking in the shower after having a weird dream.
Yeah, why not?
Do you have any other questions? Diane Casella asked, how do you pick your narrators? Zara Ram for the Time Police and Chronicles of St Mary's is amazing. So did you pick her?
I'd love to smirk and look clever, but I can only assume she was allocated. I had no say in it at all. And she's been so good and so wonderful that we've actually asked her if she will narrate all my books now, all the series, which is lovely. Apart from the Throgmorton Farm, which is Lucy, and she's great. I don't know any other narrator who could do a braying donkey as well as she does. And I did write to her when I wrote The Something Girl and said, you're going to have to do a sex-crazed rooster in this one. And she rose to the challenge. It's excellent, I have to say.
It's an unfortunate choice of words, but go on.
So yes, Zara is wonderful, and we've met a couple of times. We have lunch every now and then because she doesn't live that far away, and it is so strange to sit there and hear Max's voice coming out of somebody else's mouth. It's really odd, but yes, she's great and will always, touch wood, narrate my books.
Fabulous. Last, Will Reynolds is a couple. We'll go to you because these are good. Are all the series that you write in one universe, so St Mary's, Throgmorton Farm, and Elizabeth Cage, are they They all seem to be set around Rushfordshire. If that's the case, how does that affect the storyline more widely? So are they all in the one universe, or?
Yes, like I say, St Mary's is not quite here and not quite now. Elizabeth Cage and the Frogmorton Farms one are in a more normal universe, but geographically they're all in Rushfordshire, apart from the Time Police, which is in London, because I fell in love with Battersea Power Station and wrote the entire series around Battersea Power Station. I was walking past in the days just before it had its chimneys taken down for refurbishing. And when I was in the Air Force, we did a practice touchdown there once, which was very exciting. And I've just always had this weak spot for Battersea Power Station. So I set the Time Police there. But everybody else is in Rushfordshire.
Good. And this is quite, as time is elastic to Jodi, how does the timelines work? Is it like the Simpsons timeline in that it keeps moving forward as time goes on? So there's the same distance between now and then, but some fixed points. You might need your whiteboard for this one, Jodi.
The answer is very simple, actually. The author has got herself into a complete tangle and is at the moment exchanging panic-stricken emails with her editor about she's written herself into a complete corner and may have to flee the country if she can't find a way out, quite honestly. So, yeah, I did something silly and wish I hadn't, but it's too late now. So I'm going to have to be extra special creative to come up with a way of fixing it. So yeah, authors, yeah, not bright.
Oh, bless you. To be fair, timelines are tricky. I noticed that my first couple of books, I started mentoring years. And then what happens is when you're writing in contemporary times, things are going faster than you are, or different time, or you do, like all the Stranger Times books happen basically within the same 6 months, the first four. In the Bunny books, I just stopped mentioning dates beyond a certain point because I've got two series to split off. MCM Investigations, which is everyone who's left in Dublin when Bunny leaves. And in that one, they mentioned the pandemic happening because it suited with the story. But meanwhile, that makes no sense whatsoever, I'll be honest, in the McGarry Stateside, because he doesn't mention it at all, because it doesn't happen in that story. Like, yeah, it can get very messy if you start referring to actual times and stuff like that. And imagine with your books even more so.
I've learned not to pin myself down, and my editor occasionally just does say, you know, so where does this fit in relation to everything else, and tries to pin me down. But I've learned not to do that. It's much easier and more creative, I think, if you can go in any direction because you haven't tied yourself down to a specific timeline. So yeah, that's my answer anyway.
Excellent. That's all of those questions. So if you want to fire away.
I have questions for you now. Brace yourself. Okay. I hope I say these names correctly as well. Jeff Schmoll, do you share any favorite foods with Bunny?
It's a wonderfully specific question. Do I share any favorite foods with Bunny? To be honest, because I did a thing about in the Stranger Times books, and actually I think it's happened. Actually, it has happened in both books, where in both sets of things where I've discussed biscuits. And then I always get asked questions about biscuits. Basically, I got asked about all these biscuit things, and I couldn't even remember what biscuits I said was my favorite and stuff. Because the reality is now, and this is genuinely tragic, you might want to put some sad music over this. Breakfast burritos and stuff. Bunny in one of the books finds them, and he's literally buying them for everyone he meets and telling them how amazing they are. I'm on a gluten-free diet now, so 95% of all biscuits I can't have anymore.
Oh,
I know, it's tragic. Same as I can't have the like. Everyone always assumes I drink Guinness, which I think is from the books and also just generally being Irish. And to be fair, if you'll notice now, I also literally look like a pint of Guinness. This is my chosen look. I have the white and the black going on. The reality is, and I don't drink Guinness. I actually drink rum. And people are always confused and disappointed when they find that out.
okay. Sarah Evans, are there any events, chapters, sections you would like to rewrite from any of your books now that the book has been published?
Oh, I've said this before, but I think the only thing when I reread, I mean, you'd always like maybe phrase things a bit better and stuff, but the one thing that always bothers me is, bizarrely, the very first time Bunny shows up in the very first book. Because at the time, I honestly had no idea he was going to become the main character. He just literally turned up and wouldn't leave. But the first time he turns up, he's basically rude to Bridget, one of the other characters. And it's kind of not who he is. It was done in a funny way, But I must admit, I read it again like 7 or 8 years after the thing, well, 5 or 6 years anyway, after the thing came out. The rest of the book, I thought, actually, I thought was interesting. I actually thought it was, because I thought there'd be a big difference between it and my later ones, and it didn't feel that different. But that was the one bit that always sort of annoyed me, that that's not quite right, because that's not who Bunny is. He's not rude to people like that unless they deserve it, and then very rude. But yeah, that's the only thing that's ever really bothered me, though.
Oh, well, that's not too. This is a good one. I'm looking forward to this one. This is from, again, Neil. I hope I say your name properly. Neil Adshead, who asks, does he remember me?
Uh,
What have you done?
yes, as long as you've no follow-up questions. Of course I do. I hope you're well. Next question.
Right. So Neil, yes, he does.
And I can't apologize enough, Neil. I'll just put that in to cover myself.
Oh, I think this one's for me. Does Billy Connolly know there is an airship named after him in the future? And is he suitably honoured?
I'd imagine that is for you, yes.
I think I named an airship Billy Connolly, as you do.
Very good.
And I did, certainly. So, Jenny, no and no, I think, are the answers to that. I don't think he has the faintest idea he has an airship named after him, and he probably isn't honoured. Shame.
I'm sure he would be.
He would be if he knew, I'm sure.
Yeah, I feel weirdly obliged to try and find some way of sticking an airship in my books now and calling it after Billy Connolly as well, which would...
Please, feel free.
I mean, it's going to be a bit of a stretch, but we'll give it a go.
Oh, you can work it in somewhere. Linwyn Davis, will we find out more about Stella's past?
Yes, eventually. Once I figured it out. No, I generally have quite a bit of stuff that's kind of sitting there that I'm still going through. But yeah, I have a lot of things. So it is going to be, yes, it will come up. It will. It's interesting that the book sort of started off being Hannah's story and then they became Bancroft's story. And overall, I think the series is probably going to end up being Stella's story, really.
Yeah.
Which is, I didn't plan that at all, but it's kind of how it's going to, I think, play out. But we'll see. At least to a certain point, anyway.
Then, from a professional point of view, did you know what Stella is when you started to write about her, or have you worked it out as you've gone along?
I think I had a basis of it, and then I worked it out as I went along, I think. So by the end of the first book, because I'm actually writing something which is a brand new thing, which again is sort of set in that area at the moment. And I'm actually going through it, and it's interesting. It's the first time I've written something completely brand new in a new world since the Stranger Times, which would be 5 years now. And yeah, it's interesting because I'm figuring stuff out as I go. And because I'm writing that with my wife, actually, it's quite interesting because I'm like coming back into the every day and going, I've decided to change what that person's history is, and this is what it is now. And she's like, oh, okay. Because it's weird, because after the first book, I think it's kind of nailed down in my head. But in the first one, I'm still figuring stuff out. And oftentimes it's kind of between the first and second one, I think I nailed down exactly somebody's history. Like, what about you? Did you know a lot of the history of your characters when you were starting off? And
no, I didn't even intend to write a book for publication. I retired. I was out in Turkey and 3 weeks of sun, sea and sand, and I was bored to tears. So I thought I'd see if I had the mental discipline to write a book. And I had no idea of publishing it at all, but I was got drunk in the fish market at Fetier. Apparently, somebody said you should self-publish. And I said, oh, no, I couldn't possibly do that. Apparently somebody handed me a glass of wine and I agreed to do it. And then I was only going to write 2 books, and then I was only going to write 3. So I like to say it grew organically because it makes me sound intelligent.
Yeah, my first book, when I started doing short stories, I had this idea for a thriller, which I've never written, by the way. And I had the idea, A Man at One of Those Faces, as a title for a short story. Then I realized it was a premise which didn't have anything happening in it. And then I thought, like, basically the idea was someone's going to visit old people with dementia and things like that in hospital, and they're pretending to be whoever they want them to be. And then I hit on the idea that one of them tries to kill him. And as soon as I got that, I was like, oh, well, this isn't a short story. This is a novel. And I think this is a great thing to do. I think just take the pressure off yourself. In my head said, this is just a practice novel. I'm just writing this to see if I can write a novel, and then I'll write the other one. So when I was writing all the way through until near the very end, I wasn't trying to like think about getting a publishing deal or anything like that. I was just, well, I'm just doing this, and then I'll figure out afterwards when I write the real one. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Yes, very similar for me as well. And I've just written a full-length novel that started off as a short story and grew organically to 125,000 words, mushroomed, really. But I took the pressure off myself by telling myself, this is just a short story. I'll just add a couple more paragraphs to it. That didn't work at all. So, yeah, full-grown novel.
Yeah.
Bancroft has weirdly grown on me over the series. Have you always liked him? Please say you do, because I think he's fabulous.
I think I always knew some of the history, so it made him a little bit more palatable as a thing. But to be honest, it's one of these things where he's awful in so many ways, but also he's a delight to write because he's so much fun to have someone who's just horribly caustic to people. It's the kind of stuff you can't do in real life because you'd be dead by Tuesday.
He has no filter, has he? It just comes out.
I'm a big fan of these books, but people always think Jackson Lamb, if you've ever read Mick Herron's books, that the character there, and there certainly is some similar DNA. But the reality is actually, because The Stranger Time was basically set on a sitcom I wrote 10 years ago that never went anywhere. Say 10 years, what about 15 now? But that character, I think different name, but that character was always there because he was always the editor. And to be honest, what I was actually ripping off was a combination of Dylan Moran's character from the Brilliant Black Books sitcom that he wrote and J. Jonah Jameson, who is the editor of the Spider-Man books, because he does that where he's just ripping the face off somebody, just being horrible to everybody. And it was brilliant in it's one of the few things with Spider-Man things that have been consistently good when they've had it. So yeah, it was those two characters kind of the big inspiration sort of thing. But yes, no, he is a delight. And I think as he goes on in later books and you kind of learn some of the backstory and stuff, I think he becomes a lot more sympathetic. And I think what was interesting is when the other characters kind of understand his history a bit more, and the fact that they're almost more sympathetic to him, but he's annoyed by that fact, which I think is nice. That Hannah sort of kind of has a feels sorry for him, and or not sorry, but has more sympathy for him, and he hates that. He's literally trying to push the envelope to be more horrible, which is a lot of fun to write.
He has no self-pity, does he? I mean, he's awful. He knows it, and he really doesn't care, and he doesn't feel sorry for himself. He's had a tragedy in his life, but he doesn't wallow in it, does he? He's just unashamedly awful.
Yeah, he's just unashamedly, he's kind of that tabloid journalist kind of thing. And and it's a huge amount of fun to write.
And the third part, if Hannah and the DI ever get it together, will she be able to do something about the guest in his head?
Hopefully. But to be honest with that, that's one of the things where I used to listen to a lot of American writing podcasts and stuff. And one of the phrases they always used about opening boxes, and if you know this, but it's basically you start, you open the box and at some point you have to close it again. You have to resolve the story. So there are various different things in the books that are sort of like open things that I have vague ideas where they're going to go, but I don't know when that's going to happen. But I have the idea that that'll obviously be something they'd have to resolve at that sort of point, but I don't really know how it's going to happen, but it probably will happen at some point.
Alien in your head is pretty major, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fairly big thing, and it's one of these, I honestly don't think I'd planned that out. I think it just sort of happened quite weirdly organically, if that's the right word in this situation, where the eye sort of popped out. And I've had that where bizarrely on the last Stranger Times book, Relight My Fire, when there's zombies in it, not giving much away, that there's literally a picture on the cover, but where they actually come from, this has never happened before. I didn't figure that out. I actually really wrote myself in a corner, which I never normally do. I'm usually pretty on the ball. I completely wrote myself into a corner, and where they came from became by accident me just trying to find a way out. And it's why I say it's probably my favorite book, because the solution to the problem ended up making it such a better book than I thought it was. I enjoyed writing it so much because that idea came so late in the process. For the first time ever, I actually a couple of times genuinely laughed out loud while sitting here writing, which I've never done before or since, because it's so weird that you should be able to do that. But it was just because it was so fresh in my mind.
Excellent. Anne-Marie Porden says, are you planning more books with a focus on Decky? As I'm not familiar with nicknames for Declan, how does one pronounce Decky? Is it Decky or Desi? Did I say it right?
Yes, well, exactly as Jodi did. It's Decky. Yes, Decky will. We have the problem where he's always more entertaining when he's younger. It's one of these things. If you get a character, he gets because as a 12-year-old, absolute gangster, he's hilarious. But yes, he will definitely be featuring Like in the next book, he's not going to feature that much, bizarrely, just because of where it's going to go. But there is an opening scene I've been planning for, oh God, years for that book, where it's just him, Bunny, and Decky's grandfather, Declan Senior, sitting in a sauna. I don't even know where this idea came from, but I just had the idea that three of them sitting in a sauna, and finding it horribly awkward, as I've never understood the whole idea of the sauna myself. And then something happens at the end of that chapter to initiate the whole story and stuff. But yeah, so he is one of these characters where he's a delight to write. When you're writing that character, you just that day, you know it's going to flow really fast because, Decky is just so, that when you have certain characters like Bancroft, I guess, as well, where he's just going to snap.
Yeah.
And when you're writing, and it's just going to be fun for you as well as hopefully the reader. So yeah, absolutely, you'll see plenty of Decky in the future.
This is a question from Jodi. Will you allow him to grow up? Because some authors keep their characters at the same age forever, don't they?
Well, weirdly, I did I don't know about him as a teenager, I think, because, teenagers, they're terrible. He's just avoid them entirely. But weirdly, I did one book called Decky Must Die, which is based in kind of present. Because the idea I had was, in one of the books, I was rereading it, because I reread stuff before I start the next one, yourself, just to get things firm in my head so I don't contradict myself too much. And there was someone speculating about what Decky would be when he grew up. And I actually went, because I referred to him at different points about him growing up. I was like, I kind of doesn't really grow up to be anything, because he sort of mentioned him as an adult. And then I had this idea that because he's a little kid who basically has an opinion on absolutely everything, just constantly and really no filter and stuff. And I came up with the idea that he would end up being like a radio DJ and become famous just because in this modern era, just having opinions can be a career now. So I kind of had Decky and I sort of used it as a thing, and then someone's trying to kill him. So that happened when Decky was an adult. So there's that one thing, and I sort of like that because it dealt with Decky, and we kind of knew where Decky went on to after that, sort of. But yeah, I'll never say never. I'm so bad with planning timelines. One of the books I have planned, and I don't know when I'll write it, is actually a prequel to all of the prequels. It's the very first. It's a story. It actually ties everything together, where there's stuff that happened in the past to characters, and I always had this story in my head, and it's weird. It's quite tragic, but I've always had that story in my head, but I've never decided to write that book next. But a lot of it's there. So at a certain point, I will write that book. But when I say that, I have two Bunny books going neck and neck as to which one was being written next. And I thought actually it was going to be the other one. And then this one sort of came up on the outside because my brain one night just went through it and it came up with something very different. And about you? I mean, how many books do you have in your head at any one time? We kind of mentioned this before, but how many ideas do you have?
Oh, I have loads in my head. I usually write two books, not simultaneously, but together, because I can move from one to the other if I get stuck. And working on the second one sort of frees up something, and I'm writing away and I suddenly think, oh, of course, if he saw her behind the door, then he would realize, so I can go back to the first one and start on that. So yeah, I'm usually writing more than one together.
How I wouldn't, because I think if I started doing that, I'd literally never finish a book. If I gave my brain the allowance, I don't have the self-control for that, Jodi. Fair play to you, I could never do that, because literally we would end up with the first third of 12 different books, and I'd have to go back to trying to go back to stand-up comedy after 6 years retired. Oh wow, now that's amazing. I never knew you did that. That's incredible, especially with the detail in your books. My God, that's unbelievable.
I find it relaxing, actually, to move from one to the other. There's one down this side of my desk and one down that side.
Well, I will think about the next one, but outside of putting a note in my phone, I will not start trying to write a scene, because I actually have the opening scene of the next Stranger Times book. Literally the line that's going to open with is, "We are dead things, you and I." Yeah, but I kind of know it, and I've sort of worked it in my head, but I've not allowed myself the luxury of writing it yet, because I don't want to get pulled away from what I'm doing, because it's always like the shiny object. As soon as you're writing a book, it's always your brain's going, "Here's 12 other ideas."
Yeah. Oh God, yes, absolutely. I've no control over my brain at all. Liz Lewis asks, would love to see Brendan Gleeson playing Bunny and one of his sons, young Bunny. Please ask if a TV or film adaptation is on the cards.
Well, everything's optioned for TV, the both of them. It's one of these things. People always think you've got far more control over these things as the author than you do. Everyone always assumes I wrote the character to be Brendan Gleeson. And the reality is he was a short little tubby fella until 3 weeks before it came out. And then I realized the guy he was actually on, who was a person I know in real life, people would realize, and I panicked and changed what he looked like. And he did remarkably end up looking like Brendan Gleeson. Brendan Gleeson's a phenomenal actor. Both of his sons are phenomenal actors as well. It's Ireland, shake a tree, and an Oscar winner's going to fall out. We've got that many of them now. I was going to ask you actually about your stuff, Jodi, because I guess it's like the flipping through time, that'd be quite tricky. What's your thing with TV? You must have had discussions with people over the years.
Yes, there have been discussions. None of them have ever gone anywhere. I've always suspected, from a position of complete ignorance, that they take the proposal back and somebody in the accounts department says, are you out of your mind? Do you know how much this would cost to film? And it never goes any further. And people say now, oh, well, CGI. But I still think if you look at the first book, there's the First World War, there's the Cretaceous period several times. It's all over the place.
They can do, as you said, about the CGI and the green screen and stuff like that, without going into the controversy about the Watch series they did of Pratchett. I know I'm in Terry Pratchett book groups on Facebook, and they literally had to ban people discussing it because there was just so much rage.
It's a nightmare. It's my nightmare, certainly. However, between you, me, and the gatepost, I have taken my revenge. In the Christmas short story coming up, the film crew turns up at St Mary's for the usual St Mary's advice on a historic epic that they're about to massacre. And one of the actresses is telling Max about the bad adaptation. It was for Joan of Arc, and the actress played Joan of Arc, and she didn't burn at the stake. She leapt from the flames, overcame 40 armor-clad knights, as you do, and was finally killed by a maniacal Henry VI, who would have been 10 at the time, but never mind.
I mean, to be fair, I've met some 10-year-olds. But...
yeah. So, a little bit of revenge on behalf of authors who've had bad adaptations of their books. But yes, The Watch, I think, must be every author's nightmare.
I don't think they would have done it if he was alive, frankly, because he would have had more power to probably stop it. Things always have to change for TV. It's a different medium. Yes. You do have to have different things happening and stuff. But, it depends how far away they go. There have been great things that are sort of not that closely based on something. So you kind of have to view them as being the separate thing. As long as it's good, I guess you could live with it. But somebody doing a bad job and changing it around is tough. But yeah, it's one of these things that it's TV. But you never know. I said my stuff's in various stages. But I've just learned to kind of let it go, and because you can't control it.
I'm very old and I'll probably be dead before it all happens anyway. So I'm looking on the bright side.
You strike me as the kind of woman that's going to make at least 110 bar anything else. Eddie Izzard has a great joke about men die and women buy hats, because it's very true. God, most of the families I know is that, like, men at some point just sort of stop and keel over, and women just keep going in the best way possible.
Where have we got to? Did I ask you this one from Lisa Imbrick? Do you have any dream creatures to center a future Stranger Times novel around, or something you haven't introduced into that world that you're looking forward to putting your spin on?
Yes, excellent question. So without going into too much detail, the next Stranger Times book, because the last one happened to Halloween, and so the next sort of big time thing naturally was Christmas, which I've written a couple of books. For some reason, I don't know why, I never considered myself a big fan of Christmas, but weirdly, I love writing books set around Christmas. And the next Stranger Times book will be a Christmas book, and there will be a very weird version of a mythical creature associated with Christmas being associated with Christmas. And when I say it's a Christmas book, it's going to open with a triple murder. So it's going to be the anti-Christmas book.
For Christmas this year?
No, it's Christmas, because basically, we talked about the long lead time in publishing. And normally my books come out in January and February in the Stranger Times. And I tell my agent this idea, and the first thing he said was, you can't bring out a Christmas book in January and February. No. So it won't get done in time so what we're basically doing is we're going to have a Stranger Times short story collection coming out this year. because we've got so many we did for the podcast that we love, and there's loads of them. We've got a bunny short story collection coming out actually next week, bizarrely, because people are asking for that, and we've got some new ones in that. A couple of brand new bunny short stories because I love writing those. But there's so many Stranger Times that's going to come out, and then there'll be the Christmas book next year, just to leave something without people getting too annoyed.
What are the Stranger Times short stories? That would be great.
You've got a lot of books when you're like, do you do that thing when people ask you how many books you've written and you have to go,
Yes, actually. I have to check. People do tell me things, but I don't always listen. Or they tell me them in English and I listen in Norwegian or something. And Hazel or my editor, Frankie, will say, well, we told you. And I think, oh, did you? But yes, they did. And I just wasn't listening.
I've got a worse one than that. Somebody tweeted something at me a while ago, a little passage from a book, and said, oh, Caimh McDonnell is hilarious. And I rang my wife because she was away at the time, and I went, this is gas. Someone's tweeted a part of a book. It's like, it's not my book. I don't know whose it is, but it's not my book. And my wife looked at it, then she rang me back and went, no, that's your book. I was like, really? It was like, yeah. And I looked it up and went, oh, God, it is.
This one is from Joe Tetsab. Hello, Joe. How are you? And he wants to know, are you related to the Earl of Antrim?
I would suggest it's unlikely.
He will be disappointed because he thinks you could be distant cousins.
We have Scottish on the McDonnell side, which is my dad's side, and the O'Gormans, my mother's side, are from Tipperary. And I don't think they would have been quite so big into revolutions if they were related, I don't think. So I'm going to guess it's a no, but you never know.
Okay. Joe will be disappointed, but there we go.
Sorry, Joe.
Jeff Schmoll, what are your best tips for incorporating humour into fictional novels, presuming one is not Irish, without a beard or a cool dog?
Well, first off, get a beard and a cool dog. People get annoyed at my answers, but I always get asked about one of the genuinely fundamental things I think about, because your books have a lot of humour in them as well, as Ben Aranovich and stuff. But I think the whole point is, don't set out to write a funny book. My big thing is that humour is not a genre, it is a style. It's how you tell the story. But
and
first
that
and foremost,
it's got to arise quite naturally from what's happening.
Absolutely. It has to arise from the thing, and you can't force it. And I always say this thing about, if you got somebody walking into a room and the only reason they're going into that room is because you've got a joke about something that happens when they get there, then get out of the room, nail the thing shut, and then burn the house down. You're in the wrong area, go back and start again.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think that's why that bunny thing I said was wrong, is because I had some funny lines the bunny said in that situation. Remember I said the thing I'd like to rewrite? I had funny lines, but it wasn't right for him. It wasn't right for the story of the character in particular in that situation. And I think you always have to sort of respect the story. And if something doesn't fit that, then it's gone. I can remember when I first started getting reviews for my books, I was kind of a bit annoyed when people said how funny they were. Just in the sense that I didn't think they were that funny. I thought they were like mainly a crime book with a bit of humor in. But of course, no, most of the crime books, there are ones now, J.D. Kirk and some very good people who do that. And there's a few other examples. There always has been, really. But I guess it was because it was compared to most crime books, there isn't that humor. So that was the thing everybody latched onto. And the biggest single thing is, first and foremost, tell the story and the characters, and the humor comes out of the characters.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times stuff comes up where it's just them having a conversation, like they're trying to get to a point. But, nobody comes in and has a conversation where it's just, this thing happened. The master of it actually is Aaron Sorkin, who wrote The West Wing and loads of other things.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, huge fan of his, because he's amazing. The West Wing is so incredible because they're dealing with political crises, but they're also having, like, somebody's doing work in somebody's office and a bit of the roof falls in and stuff. And it's a brilliant example of making it real, because anybody in any situation still has the personal thing going on while the other thing's going on. I've literally watched everything he's ever written several times and read the scripts of any of the West Wings I can get hold of.
Absolutely. And your final question. Ooh. Do you recommend a hurling stick for home protection? If so, how would you go about practicing with it?
This is a hurling stick, for anyone who doesn't know what one looks like.
Wow, no, I didn't know.
I would suggest they're not bad for home security in the sense that you're unlikely to kill somebody with it, but you'll definitely make them regret turning up. Whereas a baseball bat is a much more serious thing. By the way, I was telling someone this during the week, because there's this amazing statistic, which back when the Troubles and stuff were going on, I think it was in Belfast, they went to a sports shop and they discovered that several hundred baseball bats had been bought in a year, and they could find no record of anyone buying a baseball. Which is, I mean, it's kind of shocking, but also amazing when you realize, wow.
Yeah.
They're actually probably not as good as you think they would be. I mean, you can certainly, I've known people who got hit in the head with one and regretted it, but I would say they're good for warning. I genuinely think for protection, get a cat, because they psychopathic sods.
Yes, yes, they are. Or I'll hire out my mother, the 95-year-old terrorist with a walker.
Well, there we go. I mean, your family does sound dangerous. Between the son and the mother, it sounds like you should be writing your autobiography. Sounds like it'll be incredible.
Yes, yeah, and that's not the half of it either. It comes to something when I'm the most normal one, but there we go. That's my questions done.
Fabulous.
Thank you very much. I have enjoyed myself so much. I hope you have too.
It's been an absolute delight. It feels a shame to have to go back to start writing books again now. But
I know. I'm going to go off and make myself a cup of tea and have some chocolate. Thank you so much for this. This is the first time we've done it, and it's been a huge success entirely thanks to you. And it's lovely to meet you at last.
Thank you. You've been wonderful about the books and stuff, and thank you for all your support. It's been an absolute delight, and I'm looking forward to being at the convention next year and all that. And I know we're going to see each other at the Discworld convention this year, so that's going to be very exciting.
Yes, we'll sit down and have a drink together.
Absolutely.
You take care, and best wishes to your wife as well.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye.